Night was falling over the small town, and a fierce storm was raging outside. The rain was hitting the windows like corn being thrown against glass, and the wind was howling like a hungry wolf. Thomas was alone at home, an old country house he had inherited from his grandparents. The feeling of loneliness was overwhelming, and the darkness of the night seemed to swallow everything around him. He tried to distract himself with a horror book he had found on the dusty bookshelf, but each page increased his uneasiness. The lamplight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of rain hammering the roof echoed like a steady beat in his heart. Each thunderclap made his pulse quicken, as if fear itself was approaching. The country house was old and had a dark history, full of legends about apparitions and unexplained events. The neighbors avoided talking about the place, and Thomas now understood why. He felt like an intruder in that house haunted by the past. The wood creaked and groaned with the vagaries of the storm, as if the house itself were alive and haunted by the ghosts of the past. Thomas tried to convince himself that he was safe, but the feeling that something was wrong persisted. Every sound from the house made him jump and look over his shoulder, as if he expected to find something in the shadows. As he tried to calm down, an unsettling feeling came over him. It was as if he was being watched, as if invisible eyes were staring at him. He looked around the room, but nothing was there. Just darkness and loneliness. He tried to stifle his fears and continue reading, but a new sense of uneasiness overcame him. It was as if the house was alive, breathing with an invisible presence. Every sound, every creak of wood felt like a whispered message from the house, a silent warning. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and got up. The house was silent except for the storm outside. He decided to go to the kitchen to make some coffee, hoping that the warmth and comforting aroma would allay his fears. Upon entering the kitchen, Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. A soft shuffling sound came from the floor, as if something was crawling across the wooden floor. He pressed the light switch, but nothing happened. The darkness was total, and the only illumination came from the faint light of the storm outside. He took out his cell phone and used the flashlight to illuminate the floor. What he saw made him freeze in terror. On the kitchen floor, a slender, dark figure moved. It was crouched, as if it were crawling. Her skin was pale and translucent, almost like a living shadow. The hands were long and thin, ending in sharp claws that scratched the floor. The creature's eyes were what disturbed Thomas most. They were deep and empty, like black holes that seemed to absorb light. The creature slowly turned to face him, its eyes shining in the darkness like black stars. Fear paralyzed Thomas as he watched the creature move toward him, a smooth, steady shuffle. His face was frozen in an expression of horror, his eyes glued to that terrifying figure. He tried to step back, but his feet felt stuck to the floor, as if the house itself was conspiring to keep him there. The creature advanced slowly, emitting a guttural and chilling sound. Thomas finally found his voice and screamed, running out of the kitchen and locking the door behind him. He knew he couldn't stay in that house, but the storm outside was as threatening as the creature inside. As he ran to his room, his thoughts were in a whirlwind. What was that thing? How had she gotten into his house? And, more importantly, how would he survive the night? Thomas locked the kitchen door and ran to the bedroom, his mind tormented by images of the dark creature he had encountered in the kitchen. Fear gripped him, but he knew he needed to find a way to protect himself. In the bedroom, he searched the closets for something he could use as a weapon. He found only useless objects such as old clothes and kitchen utensils. The house was almost empty, as if his grandparents had taken all his belongings when they left. The sound of the rain outside continued relentlessly, and the wind howled like a lament. Thomas knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't stay hidden in his room forever, waiting for the creature to find him. He took out his cell phone and dialed the police, explaining the situation in a shaky voice. The person on the other end promised to send help, but the storm was making it difficult for officers to arrive quickly. He knew he needed to protect himself while he waited. While on the phone, Thomas heard a sound coming from outside the bedroom door. It was like a soft, constant scratching, as if something was trying to get in. He hung up the phone and held his breath, his eyes fixed on the door. The scratching continued, and Thomas could hear the wood of the door being slowly scraped. Terror spread through him as he watched helplessly as the doorknob began to slowly turn. He retreated to the opposite wall of the room, holding his cell phone like a flashlight. The door slowly opened, revealing the darkness of the hallway beyond. Thomas could feel the creature's empty eyes staring at him, even though he couldn't see it clearly. With one last sigh, he turned on his cell phone's flashlight and pointed it at the door. What he saw made him tremble with terror. The dark creature was there, standing in the doorway, its empty eyes shining in the dim light. She moved slowly into the room, her steps dragging and heavy. Thomas's face was contorted with terror as he tried to keep the flashlight focused on the creature. The creature advanced, emitting a guttural and chilling sound. Thomas backed away, his body shaking with fear. He remembered the bedroom window, a possible escape route. With a quick movement, he rushed towards the window and forcefully opened it. The storm outside roared even louder, as if it had been waiting for him. Without looking back, Thomas jumped out the window and landed on the wet grass. He quickly stood up and looked at the bedroom window, expecting to see the dark creature following him. But the window was empty, and the house seemed silent. The creature had not followed him. Thomas knew he couldn't stay out here indefinitely. The storm was relentless, and he was soaked to the skin. He started running towards the city, looking for shelter and help. Fear still accompanied him, but he was determined to survive the night. The country house, with its darkness and dark secrets, was left behind. But the encounter with the dark creature would haunt him for the rest of his life. What was that thing? And why had he chosen his home to terrorize? The answers would remain unclear, hidden in the shadows of that terrible night. Thomas ran through the pouring rain, seeking shelter in the small town that now seemed deserted. The lights in the houses were off, and the streets were empty. The storm had kept residents locked in their homes, oblivious to the terror he had faced. He finally found shelter in a small cafe that was still open even through the storm. The cafe owner looked on in surprise when Thomas entered, soaked and shaking, but he didn't ask any questions. He offered a hot cup of coffee and a place to sit. Thomas told his story to the cafe owner, who listened attentively. The man was older and seemed to know the city well. He nodded as Thomas described the dark creature he had found at the cottage. "This isn't the first time I've heard of something like this," said the cafe owner with a dark look. "A long time ago, people whispered about strange things happening in that house. Something about an ancient curse." Those words only increased the mystery surrounding Thomas's country house. He knew he needed to discover the truth behind the creature that had chased him. With the coffee warming him and his courage renewed, he decided to return to the house, even in the storm. As he returned, Thomas thought about how he could face the creature and what he could do to protect himself. He didn't want to be defenseless again. When he arrived at the cottage, he found her silent. The storm continued outside, but the house seemed calm. He used the key he had left in the door to get in, his cell phone flashlight lighting the way. He decided to start a search in the attic, where his grandparents' belongings were stored. Maybe there was something in the ancient objects that could help him understand what was going on. The attic was a dark, dusty place, filled with stacked boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. He began going through the boxes, looking for anything that might shed light on the house's past. That's when he found an old diary, hidden under some old clothes. It was her grandmother's diary, and the pages were filled with entries dating back decades. As he read, Thomas began to uncover the dark history of his home. Her grandmother wrote about strange sights and sounds in the house, shadows that moved on the walls and footsteps that echoed in the empty hallways. She described the feeling that something was watching the family closely, something that could not be seen. As Thomas continued to read, the horrible truth began to reveal itself. The country house had been built on land that previously housed an ancient Indian cemetery. The spirits of the land's former inhabitants seemed to have been disturbed by the construction of the house, and they now roamed the halls seeking revenge. Thomas knew that the dark creature he had found in the house was a manifestation of those restless souls. He knew he needed to find a way to calm the spirits and return them to peace. With the diary in hand, he went down from the attic and began looking for information on how to perform a purification ritual. He needed to restore tranquility to the country house and get rid of the creature that had terrorized him. The storm outside continued, but Thomas was determined to face whatever was waiting for him in the house. He knew that to survive the night, he needed to unravel the dark mysteries that surrounded the house and calm the restless souls that haunted it. Thomas spent hours searching his grandmother's diary and the internet for information on how to perform a purification ritual. He knew he had to face the dark forces that haunted his country home and that had haunted him during that terrifying night. The rain continued to fall outside. The storm seemed to give no respite. The cottage was plunged into darkness, except for the dim light of his cell phone flashlight. Thomas was determined to do whatever was necessary to rid the house of the restless souls and the creature that haunted him. He discovered that the ritual involved the burning of specific herbs and incense, as well as the reciting of ancient words of protection. Thomas found the necessary ingredients in the house, leftovers from the times when his grandparents practiced mysterious rituals. As he prepared for the ritual, the feeling of being watched returned. He could feel invisible eyes following him as he placed the herbs into a small censer. Fear enveloped him, but he forced himself to continue. With the ingredients ready, Thomas began the ritual. He lit the incense and herbs, letting the smoke fill the room. As the smoke rose, he recited the words of protection, pronouncing each syllable carefully. The house seemed to react to the ritual. Shadows seemed to retreat before the fragrant smoke, and the air became lighter. The sound of the storm outside died down, as if the house was calming down. Thomas continued to recite the words and burn the herbs, his resolve growing stronger with each moment. He knew he was facing the dark forces that had terrified him, and he would not back down. It was then that the dark creature appeared. She emerged from the shadows, her empty eyes fixed on Thomas. But instead of advancing towards him, the creature seemed to hesitate, as if being affected by the ritual. Thomas continued to recite the words and burn the herbs without looking away from the creature. He could feel that he was closer to achieving peace at the cottage, and nothing would stop him. The creature finally retreated, its dark form slowly falling apart. Thomas continued the ritual until the end. The shadows of the cottage seemed to dissipate, and the darkness gave way to morning light. When the ritual was completed, Thomas knew he had succeeded. The house was calm, and the storm had passed. He had faced the dark forces that had haunted him and pushed them away. Thomas knew the country house still held its secrets, but he was determined to live in peace there. The dark creature and restless souls were now at peace, and the house could finally find its rest. As the morning progressed, Thomas walked out of the cottage and looked up at the clear sky. He knew the storm had passed, and he had survived the night. The country house, with its dark history and ancient mysteries, now seemed like a peaceful place. Thomas's story of that terrifying night at the cottage has become legend in the small town. People talked about what he had faced and how he had triumphed over dark forces. But for Thomas, the experience stayed with him forever. He knew that darkness could hide terrifying secrets, but also that courage and determination could face even the greatest terrors. And he was determined to live his life in peace, knowing that he had faced the unknown and emerged victorious.